Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question for Mr. Shull. Are you aware of my former colleague Kenny Chiu's private member's bill to establish a foreign influence registry in Canada before the last election?
Yeah, it rings a bell. I couldn't cite a chapter and verse right now, though.
Are you aware of other countries that have foreign influence registries, and do you have a comment on whether or not they're useful tools?
I think it depends on how you scope it, and I appreciated your questions to the previous witnesses. I'm not an expert in it, so I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction.
Okay.
I think obviously foreign influence is a bad thing. We've got to be on top of it, but there's different ways of approaching it.
Maybe I'll flip over to Dr. Luprecht, because one of your recommendations was dealing with foreign actor laws. Can you comment on the foreign actor registry? Are you familiar with it from the last before the last election?
Well, both the United States and Australia have. So one of the things that it avoids is people showing up in front of Parliament under spurious, for instance, conditions, and not realizing that these are actually entities that are effectively paid for or otherwise resourced or tasked by foreign government. So I think certainly it helps to enhance the ability to distinguish what effectively foreign agents. I think there's a number of other things that we can do. It's one tool. It's one tool in the toolbox. I think I'd have higher priorities. Having a proper, independent, standalone foreign intelligence collection service would be a higher priority. Having a standalone criminal intelligence commission in Canada, like Australia does. Having a 5-year annual review. Having proper doctrine in terms of cyber engagement, red lines for Canada and its sovereign capacity to hit back at countries that compromise our critical infrastructure. So I think there's probably things that I'd say have a higher payoff than the registry, but the registry is certainly one element in a toolbox.
Dr. Luprecht, are you aware of what happened to my colleague Kenny Chiu in the last election, primarily because he introduced a bill to propose making this foreign influence registry?
I'm aware of some of the online activity that was directed at your colleague, and I also believe that activity had a material influence on the outcome in that particular writing. So
there was a McGill study, I'm sure you might be aware of it, that said, the overall election, they said it didn't have a material impact, but at certain riding levels, they can't discount that it had a material impact on the election. Would you say that he was one of the ridings, primarily because he brought forward this bill that was targeted by foreign disinformation campaigns to defeat a candidate, an incumbent candidate in a Canadian election?
Yeah, I think it clearly undermined our democracy, and it was quite nefarious because the activity, as you well know, was conducted in language in neither English nor French. It was primarily conducted in a third language, a language in which our security, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies have rather limited capabilities. Nor did we have a plan of how we would actively identify such influence activity and be able to counter it. And so, yes, it was. I think it is a canary in the coal mine of what any member of parliament faces when they actively engage in activity that displeases some of our adversaries.
That's great. I can understand, I'm reading the 2021 Elections Canada report, and, they sort of talk about misinformation and disinformation, but it seems like they're really downplaying the impact of disinformation and information, saying, that Canadians can trust the election. And I think overall, the vast majority, we can trust the election, but we know how sometimes elections in Canada can literally be decided by a single riding or a single handful of ridings. Do you think that Elections Canada needs to take this more seriously, and even not only in their reports after the fact, but even during an election to alert Canadians that there is a disinformation campaign being conducted during the election?
It's not an online problem. This is a long-standing problem in Canada, where riding associations are captured by certain entities that are either close to certain countries, to certain ethnic groups, to certain religious groups. So what I would say is that the online attempts at clear interference in our democratic processes is simply a continuation of a long-standing problem that is related to riding and constituency association levels and not sufficient attention, but also not efficient constraints.
Do you think Elections Canada should have done more?
I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.